Recording live from northwest suburbs of Minneapolis. This is Twin Cities Affiliates. I'm your host and the creator, LaShawn Cooper, aka Coop DeVille. And bringing it back, we've been gone for a while, but starting the reboot of Twin City Affiliates podcast. I have a family friend for all my life, basically. And he is willing to bless us with his presence today. And this is the infamous Mr. Ronald Scott. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here today.
Good. Yeah, man. This is a very talented brother, musical brother. We're gonna get into that in a minute, but I all my life was able to have a front row seat of seeing you do your thing on the piano, on the organ, singing, all kind of stuff. So before we get into that though, I just want to dive right into it. On this podcast, Mr. Scott, we like to show pride in the Twin Cities and the whole state of Minnesota, and shedding the light on people that are from here or affiliated with the Twin Cities. So I wanted to start off by asking you, how are you a Twin Cities affiliate?
Well, I was born and raised here, and I left when I was in 21, for a little while, but pretty much I was born and raised here, and that goes back some years. That's before we had a 94 freeway.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into that. Yeah,
35E freeway. I was able to see, that was my life, seeing that come to, I remember what that looked like when there was houses back there.
Right, and for those that don't know, he's talking about the Rondo community, which is in St. Paul. So we can just start off with that, because me growing up in the church of St. James AME Church in St. Paul, which is part of the Rondo community, I just would love to just hear what it was like growing up in Rondo, which was a successful Black community, before Highway 94 and the aftermath of Highway 94.
Well, my mother was born in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Okay.
And how they got there was my grandfather and my grandmother. They were entrepreneurs. They were in the restaurant business.
Okay.
And they had a establishment. They started off in Kansas City, and they decided they wanted to expand, and they built a what they call it, dance hall in Bismarck, North Dakota. They held 1,500 people.
Wow.
And they had that, and they had that in their restaurant all together. And my grandfather decided to move here back in the 1900s, like around 1911, 1912. Okay. No, actually, they moved here in 1920. I take that back. They moved here in 1920.
And they moved to St. Paul?
Moved to St. Paul.
Okay.
And what brought them to St. Paul, because my grandparents, my grandfather originally from Arkansas, my grandmother's from Coldwater, Mississippi.
Okay.
And what brought them here was the railroad.
Okay.
And if you wanted to get from any place going west, like out to Seattle, you had to come through St. Paul, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities. And that railroad, the Great Northern Railroad and the Northern Pacific, they ran from Chicago to Seattle, coming through Milwaukee, and hitting Minneapolis, St. Paul. So a lot of people who've come to this area came here because they were able, the jobs were plentiful in the railroad business as porters, cooks and porters. And so my grandfather, he moved here, and then he ran on the railroad. Plus, he sat down there and they had the restaurant, the bar.
And was that downtown St. Paul?
No, that actually it was at 5. It's not there no more, but it's
Right.
550. Was it 554 5 something like that? Dale. Well, it was in between
okay.
Dale and in between what they call Concordia, which was Rondo back then, and Carroll.
Oh, okay.
You know, the school sits there now.
Right. Right. So how? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
No, I said the school sits there. I was trying to think what it was before that. It used to be Control Data, and they transformed it into a school in around I think somewhere around in the 90s, late 90s.
So, and that's just a great history, because a lot of people don't realize that Black people in Minnesota goes beyond. A lot of people think that most of our people came up here in the Great Migration, but I mean, there was a lot of us in the late 1800s, and then, like you just said, with your background with your grandparents in the early 1900s. But how was it growing up in Rondo? What was the temperament like before
it was
Highway 94?
Really tight and close community. There was businesses here, and when I was growing up, my grandfather passed away before I had a chance to know him. So and after he passed away in 1936. My grandmother she ran the restaurant until about 1939, and she sold that. And she was an active member at St. James. So I grew up in the church. My grandmother, she played piano, and she sang in the choir. My mom sang in the choir and taught Sunday school. So back then, the church, St. James AME Church, which is down Central and Dale, that was the church that we went to, and the prominent churches were Pilgrim, which was down the street on Central, and Mount Olivet, and Camphor, and back then, there was a lot of things that all these churches did together. They had programs, and they shared different things, and it was a really tight community. Where we were at, it was a Black community, but at the same time, where there's two sections of Rondo. You had the lower Rondo, and then you had a upper Rondo, which the lower Rondo would start somewhere around Wright Street and come up to. It came up to Dale. And a lot of over the period of time, a lot of the people that were way down lower Rondo, because they were taking all those property away at that particular time, preparing for the freeway, a lot of those people had moved up to upper Rondo. In the when I'm saying upper Rondo, from Dale Street to Lexington. The schools we had. I went to Maxwell School, which was the original Maxwell School, was right there on St. Albans and St. Albans between Rondo and St. Anthony, which is freeway, and you have to, right now you see, where the freeway's at, but that was all that was all dug out.
Wow.
There were houses and all that. I got pictures of that. There were houses and everything that was there before that, sitting as high as the houses are sitting up there now.
Yeah, and it just blows my mind, because I've seen some of the pictures, not too many, but I've seen some of the pictures of how Rondo was before the highway was built, and I've seen some of those pictures of some businesses and houses that were there right where the highway was. But before we even get into that, so is it fair to say that Rondo, was it like a Minnesota version of a Black Wall Street? I mean, there was so many Black businesses.
There was Black businesses here on Rondo. You know, the thing when you look at the freeway and they're starting to examine this now. At the time, and this is not just in St. Paul, it's Minneapolis too.
Right.
When you look at freeways, they ran through pretty much the main part of the Black communities,
Wow.
which separated a lot of our businesses and all that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that lived there, pretty much either if they couldn't find a place there, either they moved from. We were at that particular time. We were in between University and Selby, you know, and from I would say from Western to Lexington. But as things start, the freeways start coming in, you start seeing more African Americans moving. They moved a little bit south of Selby, you know, which is Selby is south, about 4 blocks south of Concordia, which was Rondo back then. Right. You start seeing people moving more into over on the other side of Selby, between Selby and Summit, was a Jewish community.
Oh, okay.
And so
I've actually heard that.
Yeah, the Jewish communities gradually, as Blacks start moving in there, a lot of the Jewish communities start moving out to Highland Park. There was still some out there already, but there was, you know, at that particular time, you had the real rich Jewish people living in the Highland Park area. But then as the freeway came in, a lot of those people that lived between Sherburne to Portland and St. Paul, just before you get to Summit, a lot of those people moved further out into Highland, the Highland Park area.
Right. And so, so just growing up as a kid, so it must have just been before the highway was built, it must have just been a community that had pride and more of a unity. Is that fair to say?
Very much of a unity, because you had, keep in mind, a lot of the people that growing up, a lot of the kids that grow up. See, I grew up when we're talking about as the freeway was taking place. You have to put all these things in perspective. We also had a baby boom.
Right.
So there was a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that, there was a lot of programs they had for the kids to do, And I mean, you don't see it now, but I mean, we were ice skating.
Wow.
You look at some of these parks, you get the African American out there ice skating. That brother ain't gonna be a house. But back then we ice skated, but the parents created an atmosphere to keep the kids busy.
Right.
We had Hallie Q. Brown, which basically, when you look at Hallie Q. Brown, if you ever go down and look at some of the pictures of Hallie Q. Brown, and you wonder how, you see different social clubs, they used to have dances and stuff like that. We had our dances at, my mom and them, they used to have dances at Hallie Q. Brown because we couldn't go down to the rent a hotel like we do now.
Right, right.
But the thing that we had though, we had, from people running on the worked on the railroad, some were cooks and working in some of the houses that for rich folks and all that, and working in St. Paul Club, we were cooks, we had waiters. We knew how to serve, and we were basically serving them,
Okay.
So we knew how to take what we seen and create our own. So they weren't gonna let us come downtown and rent the hotels or have ballrooms. We used the Hallie Q. Brown, and everybody chipped in. They fixed the Hallie Q. Brown up and made it look just like a fancy ballroom.
Right.
And the ones who cook, they did the cooking, they served the food, and that was. And then with the different social clubs that you had, everybody pitched in because and actually they knew how to entertain.
Yeah.
You know, you don't see that now.
Right. Well, it's more as individuals. We're more individuals now instead of
Correct.
unified compared to your time. Um, that's just amazing. And I think I've seen some of those pictures of that. But can you go into more of like the type of businesses? Like, do we have our own market, or do we have some, you know, black tailors or anything like that?
I'll give you an example. I had a cousin, and I was sharing it with somebody a couple of weeks ago. You had people that you had the Fields drugstore. You know, we had Ted Allen. He had the insurance company. A unique thing that we had that a lot of people didn't realize, because we had to, getting, the kids wanted to go to college, or we had to buy houses. They came, there was a credit union, which was a black credit union.
Wow.
Because, they figured out a way back then how to sit down and have things without having to go downtown and ask the man for it.
Yeah.
And so we could create our own, we were able to create our own, kind of our own wealth inside the community, even though, a lot of things we couldn't get, but, we couldn't go to the bank and sit down and ask for a loan to get by a house, but you could go to the credit union.
Right.
You could go to the credit union and ask them to help you get a car because you got money put into it. And those are the things that we did. We had to create something. We took something that wasn't there and created something. The Walter Baines, he had which we call he had a business that I think he had somewhere around 15 or 20 trucks, and he provided coal. Because houses weren't running on gas back then; they were either running on coal or wood. But so that was our energy source.
Yeah.
So he had his own business that did that. So there were different black businesses. Roger Anderson's father, he built buildings, apartment buildings and different things in the community. So, but we had people that were sitting down there. So the community is where you see a community, they see what they visualize they want their community to look like. We had black police officers.
Wow.
And the ones with, we had, at least 4 black police officers that were in the community. But what was unique about that, the police officers knew every kid in this neighborhood. And they knew the parents. And, those white police officers.
That's unity right there.
There were 4 police officers that worked along with them, but they knew us then. So they knew exactly our culture. You don't see that now.
No.
You might see a police officer that comes in here now, he came from Albert Lee.
Yeah.
He has never been around a black person in their life.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they're not used to seeing us talk the way we talk, accurately, and all of a sudden our emotions scare them.
Sometimes I even our presence, but yeah,
the presence alone just scares them to death because they're not seeing that. And back then you had to live in the community to be, to represent it. So, so you don't see that now. I mean, they can come from all over to be a police officer, but these were people that came from within the community.
Wow, that's powerful. And then I've also heard of was there I mean, I guess just all different types of businesses. Black tailors I've heard of, and
there were tailors. There was people that you had 2 stores that sit down and work on, basically leather shops that sit down and repair your shoes, everything like that, cleaners.
Wow.
Drugstores. We had barbecue place, couple.
Yeah, I would love to see some of these pictures, Mr. Scott. If you have them, I would love to share it on here. And
I'll get you some pictures and let you look at, what we have. And a friend of mine, his grandparents, they own the barbecue place. It was Booker T's, and I can get you that information and give it to you.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
And they got pictures of that,
Mhm.
We even had, they even had between the Elks, which was the organization here, and then you
I
have your
heard of
Black
them.
Shriners and Masons.
Yeah.
They had parades. They even had the Drum Bugle Corps in St. Paul, the St. Paul Elks. You had the Minneapolis Elks Drum Bugle Corps. And every time they practiced so like that, they would draw everybody in the neighborhood to come down. They'd come down and watch them practice. And
Right.
then when the parades came, people sit down. Now, I think I got some pictures that sit down. You can see when they lined up for a parade, and they had observation booths. I got a picture of them, where they were sitting in the observation booth. They had the suits on, dignitaries and all that. And they took pride in this was their community. This was our community. They took pride in what we did.
And this is so important that, we're doing this interview because I think people just really need to hear from people that are, that are still living, who live in these type of communities. And what people don't realize is not just one or two communities in America. Like, there was a lot of Black Wall Streets, a lot of Greensboro, North Carolinas, a lot of Rondo communities all through America. And these stories need to be heard. So that's why I'm so thankful that you decided to come on here and share this. Which brings me to my next point. Growing up in Rondo and you telling me these stories, I know I can imagine, but tell me exactly in detail, when they built the highway of Highway 94, explain how devastating that was to the community and what was the aftermath of it.
It was very devastating. In fact, there was a group, from Pilgrim. I mean, I'm just going to say Pilgrim, but the community, they fought hard to keep them, because the original plans of the freeway was to sit down and build it, not dig a hole, but build a hill. And the freeway was going to sit above.
Right. Because right now it goes down. Okay, so they talking about building it like elevated.
Elevated, and the people here said, you're already taking away our homes. No, we don't want you to sit down and be throwing trash on us.
Okay, yeah.
That whole process, Black people rallied behind that. We couldn't, through eminent domain and every way they were able to get the property and move us. Because there was a lot of houses here that have been moved out of the community. That were semi mansions, and what they ended up doing with those houses were, they moved those houses. They tore down the houses that weren't with it, but there was a lot of houses that they sat down and moved.
Yeah,
and they moved them out of the community.
And I see that at the I always forget the name, but at the in St. Paul, the outside of the information of Rondo community. I don't know why it slips my mind, but but they have a list of a lot of people's whose houses were lost or businesses that were lost, and they show the blueprint of 94. So
yeah, there's a lot of businesses that had that. They basically folded. They tried to create a lot more things here. I think the last step that they tried to, they came in, and that was probably in the 70s when they came with the Model City program, which, they did a few things in there, but I look at some of the places that we had, like Rose Buddies, which became the Ebony Lounge, but Rose Buddies was the barbecue place, which sit on University and all that. University was a prominent place, and they had like the Criterion, that was the fish place down there. In fact, the Criterion is, I can't think of the movie, but there was a movie about McDonald's, I can't remember the name of the movie, but the person who started McDonald's actually met the lady that his wife, she was married to the guy who owned the Criterion.
Really?
And they divorced. She divorced that guy that owned the Criterion, and married the guy that started McDonald's.
Wow.
He introduced. She taught him how to make malts. And it was some type of a powder. Instead of buying ice cream, it was made with a powder, so they could sit down and preserve it for a longer time. But all that was going on. University was a prominent area. I mean, there was a lot of entertainment that was in here. St. Paul was really the entertainment town at one time.
And yeah, and that's what I tell a lot of my family members, that don't live here, and some of my friends, and I tell them about the history here and how actually St. Paul was the city and Minneapolis was more up and coming, and the entertainment was more St. Paul first.
Yeah, St. Paul, I guess what they call it, and you probably seen these tours. They have the gangster tour where they, a lot of the guys that come in here.
They did.
Yeah, a lot of the gangsters that
Al Capone, I think he had
Al Capone and all them.
Babyface
This
Nelson.
was a neutral zone, and they couldn't. Basically they could come here, and a lot of them lived up in White Bear. A lot of them owned the homes over on Summit. Right. But they came here in a neutral zone and then go down this, which would be, I think they call that South St. Paul, down there by 494. It comes in to Concord and all. If you look down there, the whole, you can see that how that old city was set up. But it was a neutral zone. They have tours that go through and talk about the gangsters back then.
Yeah, I've heard of the tours. Actually, I had some people that have done the tour, so they were telling me a lot of information on that.
Yeah, and it's very, very. It's St. Paul was, and so that's why it was entertainment, because these guys had the money to sit down and pay for it.
Yeah, right.
And that was before my time, but that.
Right.
but I do know the history behind some of that.
Right.
But when I was coming up, what we would have is we did a lot of things with Halleck Brown, because we had the football team, they had baseball team, they played basketball, they did boxing down there. You want to learn, a lot of after school programs that was going on. If you want to sit down there and you were interested in the craft, you could go down there. And I think I made a bookcase and some lamps and all that stuff down there. Wood shop, and they kept the kids busy, active, and everything.
Right.
The parents were, they knew that their kids were safe. A lot of the people that were counselors that they worked at Halleck Brown, they were upcoming people who were looking at going into either criminal justice or going into counseling or going into being teachers. It was a good beginning for them, because when they got through, as they were going to college, they were working there, and they gave them a good background and said, "Do you have any experience?" "Yeah, I worked at the Halleck Brown, or I worked at the Overboards Club." So they had which you really didn't need it at the time, of work history.
Exactly.
I mean, I told a person, I said, I worked all my life. I said, I've never had to give a resume.
Well,
it was basically credibility.
Yeah.
I just walked out and say, "You want a job?" Bam, go down there. They said, "You want to work?" It wasn't like the work wasn't there.
Right.
If you want to work, the job, I was able to find a job, no problem. And I never, after the person, I said, I worked, all the way up, and even the computer business,
Right. And just looking out for each other. I mean, that just sounds like true unity.
Yeah. And it was just a thing where a friend of mine, I'm saying friend, I met him through the Urban League. And the Urban League sent me there, and they had a casting. "Oh yeah, come on in." I had no clue. I was at the University of Minnesota. I had no clue what software was or what hardware was.
Right.
And I took the job. The guy said, "Would you be interested in going to school and working?" I said, "Yeah." I mean, you're in college, and you're able to go to college, and you got a job to sit down and you're working. at the same time, it was helping me to pay my way through college.
And I'm so glad that you sharing this, because me as a suburban kid, but growing up in St. James AME Church, I always felt and I always was taught the spirit of Rondo community. And then I never quite understood it as a kid, but then as I got older and more conscious, then I understood the teachings and why I was feeling that. And then I see the pictures and I could relate. So I felt what you're talking about. I felt that growing up and just being in St. James AME Church.
Yeah, I mean, you seen what was going on in the church when they sit down at a banquet. You seen all the men back there getting the food together, and some of them,
right.
And they I watched some of them sit down and go, and they had their white chefs, jackets on and like that. They took it, they really took pride in what they were doing,
I mean, and I'm glad you said it, because I remember as a kid, the pride of the church and the community. I remember when we used to have fashion shows at St. James, and I remember even Kirby Puckett coming down to a couple of those fashion shows and him showing love to St. James, because I think his wife's family grew up in that church as well. So I just remember that, and that's why I tell people, like, my childhood, I would just, because growing up in the suburbs in the 80s, and in Brooklyn Park, it wasn't as diverse as it is now. So I just know my parents always wanted me to be connected with my people. And then when I came to St. James, it was normal to see my people, and I got to see so many positive men and positive women, and just a real community just within the church alone. So I can imagine with the stories that you sharing of the whole Rondo community, it was probably at a more mass.
Oh yeah, I just watched, my mom and my grandmother. They spent a lot of time over at that church. They'd be selling different things, dinners, bars of soap, boxes of soap.
And I remember when I was growing up.
And it was just amazing if they wanted, they seen what they had to do, and everybody supported each other. If you look at, I think I've got some, because my mom was a historian there. If you look at what they had called the helper, and the helper was like your church bulletin. But if you go in there and you open it up, and this was back, I got probably about 25, 30 of these things sitting in that history book that she had. You open it up and all that, and said, well, what they advertising the cleaners in a liquor store in the church bulletin? But it was black. Oh, where else we can have it? And then we had our newspapers. We had our black newspapers.
And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just been learning about the black newspaper. I learned about that last year. There was a lot of black newspapers.
The things that people would do, that they basically, it was dinners or something like that. Everybody, not just because you went to St. James, Pilgrim would come up and help. He'd come up and buy dinners from you. Mount Olive would buy them. Everybody worked together. A community is where, to me, and that's what I seen back then. If you want a safe community, or you want a nice community, you get everybody on board, because this is where you come live. This is where you come. This is where you can sit down there and feel. You can see your brothers and sisters. Sit down. You feel relaxed. And comfortable. You shouldn't be able. You should be able to walk down the street and feel good about it.
Well, I know when my parents moved there in '74, they were really glad that they found St. James AME Church, and they were able to, have a church home and have people that look like them, because coming from Mississippi and Chicago was a culture shock, but you had the Rondo community where it felt like home for them. So I can relate to that.
Yeah, in fact, when your let's see, when your parents came to St. James, I had just had come back into the city.
Okay.
And I hadn't got, as soon as I got back here, I think I didn't come right to St. James at first. I didn't come back. I grew up in St. James and everything, but I was playing music at the time. And I came back and I started playing for a couple of churches, but I hadn't got to St. James yet. That was the church I grew up at.
Right.
You know, played for several different churches, but before that, I was played in bands around here back in the day.